CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson.
What is going on, CFL fans? Are you ready for kickoff? We sure are. Welcome to CFL 110, Season 2 of CFL 110. I'm Andrew Paterson along with Jeff Hamilton. And today, looking ahead to next week's season openers, we're going to be talking about one big question for each CFL team heading into the 2025 season. And then a little later on, we'll take a look at some of the futures odds before kickoff for the CFL season over with our partners at Coolbet Canada. If you missed the program last year, we got it going for year number one and had an incredible time. Cannot wait to get going again with the 3-down game. We do have some sponsorship opportunities, so if you do have a business that is wondering about potentially getting involved with Winnipeg Sports Talk, fire us an email at winnipegsportstalk@gmail.com, and we'd love to get you on board with CFL 110. We do want to thank our great partners at Coolbet who do so much with us at Winnipeg Sports Talk. Added to the festivities this year will be weekly picks against the spread with myself, Jeff Hamilton, and maybe even producer Michael Remus and Connor Rabchak. But we'll get to all of that as we get into it. Next week on the program, our favorite future picks, Grey Cup, MOP, win totals, and much more. But today, Hammer, we get ready to set the stage for the 2025 season. It's great to have you back, my friend, and I can't wait to do it again with you all season long.
Could we have picked a better day for it too, Huss? Here it's shining in Winnipeg. The 2025 season is right in front of us. Can't wait to, as I mentioned to you when I did my weekly hit on Winnipeg Sports Talk, just looking forward to the drama this year, man. The CFL just does not disappoint when it comes to being a bit of a circus week to week. And to break it down with you again for a second season on CFL 110, man, I couldn't be happier.
Well, and you know what? Before we kind of dive into each team, I have to say that this is one of the most intriguing CFL seasons I can remember going into for covering this league for a long time. I mean, certainly you've got a couple teams in the East which were a little bit ahead of the West when it came to the regular season. You've got the Argos defending a championship. You've got a number of new quarterbacks. And honestly, when we look at the West Division, we'll start there with the BC Lions. I think you could make an argument for a number of teams to be the best team coming in. And that's a little different considering the domination the Bombers have had in the regular season and certainly in the playoffs, running now 5 years in a row as the Western rep in the Grey Cup.
Honestly, to build off that, Huss, I mean, look at the quarterback depth in the league, right? Like look at McLeod Bethel Thompson. He's now, in a different home. You have Cody Fajardo. They obviously switched places in Edmonton and Montreal. And now you have two young quarterbacks coming into play here. I find it to be just a fascinating season coming up here.
Well, let's get right to it. And I have a feeling quarterbacks are going to be dominating much of the conversation because we know how important the pivot is to success in the Canadian Football League. And why don't we start way out west with the British Columbia Lions? And I guess the big question is, Jeff, will we see the return of Nathan Rourke from 2022? Took the league on, over at one point, on fire, went to the National Football League, came back, and I think everyone expected it would just happen immediately again, and it didn't. He's committed now to the British Columbia Lions. They've got a new head coach and former Bomber OC Buck Pierce. Will we see the return of the Golden Boy Nathan Rourke, or will it be more of the struggles that we saw for that BC offense once he returned from the 4-down game last year?
Honestly, Huss, we could literally do a question about the quarterback for every single one of these teams because this just how important the quarterback is to each team. But there's no doubt that whichever Nathan Rourke shows up is going to determine how successful the BC Lions are going to be this season. The question is, can he return back to his 2022 form? The reason why we say 2022 is because the numbers were so outlandish, Huss, that if he can get even close to those numbers, BC is going to be an absolutely dangerous outfit. bad defense, who cares? If Nathan Rourke can get to that form, and that form, Huss, was 3,300 passing yards, 25 touchdown passes to 10 interceptions in 10 games. The comparison last year, after he came in, now there was obviously some crazy circumstances. There was a rift with Vernon Adams when Nathan Rourke showed up. Nathan Rourke had taken over for Adams when he was injured and then got the keys the rest of the way. That was a major issue in the locker room, right? He ended up finishing the season 9 games, 1,700 passing yards. Complete opposite. So new slate here, new offensive coordinator in Buck Pierce. Jordan Maksimic is in Edmonton, but Nathan Rourke and how he performs, how he can gel with his new group of receivers, new team really here. There was a lot of change in that locker room, that roster, which needed to happen. But the stakes, Huss, they remain just as high as ever. And with Nathan Rourke making the kind of money that he is, the most expensive player in the entire league, beyond $600,000 a year, this is a guy who needs to show up week to week and needs to be significantly, not a little bit better, Huss, significantly better than he was last season if the BC Lions are going to have a chance in the tough West Division.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this team is going to go as far as Nathan Rourke will take them, although I am very intrigued as to see how Buck Pierce does in his first year as the head coach on the sidelines. Now, Buck is a former quarterback, did an amazing job here in Winnipeg. He certainly has all the tools to succeed in the job, but we all know that, moving up from OC to taking care of an entire football team, a little different, and they do have an offensive coordinator as well. So there's a lot of pressure on this team. Like, after the disappointment of not making to the Grey Cup, it's very clear that Amar Doman is spending, he is doing his part as a great CFL owner to give this organization the tools to compete and win in the Canadian Football League. And while Nathan Rourke will be the guy that we're watching behind center each and every week, and inevitably he will have the biggest impact on it, I'm really interested to see how he clicks under this new offense with Buck Pierce, because it has been an offseason of plenty of change on the West Coast.
I will say this as an added point to it. They beefed up their O-line. Their O-line, I wouldn't go as far as to say Swiss cheese last year, but it certainly wasn't good. Nathan Rourke wasn't getting the same time to deliver his passes as he was 2 years ago. Picking up Dejon Allen from Toronto, bringing back David Foucault from Edmonton, that should help build that line, bring that consistency back week to week, and help Nathan Rourke be the quarterback we saw in 2022.
Let's move to Southern Alberta and the Calgary Stampeders. And, speaking of off-season changes, this was a very unfamiliar place for the Calgary Stampeders to be. Out of the playoffs for the first time in 2 decades. VA, former BC Lions quarterback, moves in the division to the Calgary Stampeders. And the one guy sticking around from last year amongst the coaching staff is the head coach, Dave Dickenson. We'll get to VA throughout this conversation, but I think the biggest question going in for Calgary is, can they compete, and can Dave Dickenson do enough to maintain the confidence of the organization and stay as the coach of the Calgary Stampeders?
Dave Dickenson has seen the best of what it's like to be a leader of the Calgary Stampeders, and he's seen the absolute worst. The unfortunate part for him is the worst has come the last 2 seasons. As you mentioned, Haas, the Calgary Stampeders missed the playoffs for the first time in about 20 years. Well before Dave Dickenson was coaching this team, he was in fact playing on this team during that run. So if you look at this team here, Haas, they've been, for years, if not the better part of a decade under Bo Levi Mitchell, who of course is in Hamilton now, it was known inside the building as the Stampeder way. Outside of the building, it was like, holy smokes, everyone just wanted to be the Calgary Stampeders. They wanted to find that consistency. And what we've seen over the last 2 seasons is not just a horrible record. And while they missed the playoffs only last season, they finished with a below 500 record the year before and made the playoffs. Or it was at 500. It was an awful record still, and they made the playoffs. The issue is not just the win-loss record. The issue was the problems that were percolating in the locker room. But there was a major rift between the veteran players and some of the younger players, and it was going on for that whole first year in 2023 with the promises that they were going to fix it, that it was growing pains with a handful of new players, again, younger players. Well, it just seemed to get worse in 2024. And while, Dave Dickenson, you asked the question, is he able to do enough? It's the number one question for me with surrounding the Calgary Stampeders, because outside of a couple personnel, he was really the only one who survived this offseason when you could make the argument as the GM and head coach of this team that he's the biggest problem. So the spotlight starts on Dave Dickenson. Did he do enough in free agency? They went out and they paid for a lot of players. They lost a lot of their star players from last season, replaced them. So there are going to be a lot of moving parts in every phase of the game for the Stampeders. And I'm very curious if they can adjust in time. We've seen what happens when you get off to a slow start in the West. Unless you're the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and you've established that consistency, you're probably not digging yourself out of a hole. And I look at the competition for the Stampeders early on in this season. I look at their roster and their perceived upgrades, and I don't see them being better than Winnipeg. I don't see them being better than Saskatchewan. I don't see them being better than BC, and I don't really see them being better than Edmonton. So for me, and I'm more than happy to eat crow at the end of the season, the Stampeders look like a team that is going to finish last place in the West again. And I don't think Vernon Adams is enough to change that narrative.
Now, I'm going to give Dave Dickenson a little bit more the benefit of the doubt here.
Okay.
I realize we can, and listen, pro sports is a what have you done for me lately business. There's no doubt about it. You can be great for a long time and suck for a couple of years, and someone else is going to be there to take your job. I do understand, though, why they gave Dave the opportunity to do it. He has been synonymous with success in this franchise for the better part of probably half of his life, both as the quarterback and now as a head coach. And
100%.
You just don't forget how to operate at a championship or elite level, in a year or two. And I think there was a lot of factors around it. Now, there's no doubt, to your point and to the question, there's a lot of pressure on Dave Dickenson to turn this thing around and get it moving in the right direction. But he's got a guy now behind center that I think will be as motivated as any player in the Canadian Football League to stick it to his old team and prove that all that hype about potentially being the MOP at the start of last season, Vernon Adams still has the game and could be on a bit of a revenge tour of his own. Now, listen, like always, tons of new players coming in. We'll see how that all gels out. But I'm actually a bit higher on the Stampeders this year for one reason, and it's Vernon Adams. And we'll get into, his number for MOP this year, because I do think that if he has a great season and they make the playoffs and are in the top three in the West, Vernon Adams is going to be a guy that's going to be getting a lot of love from the voters because of the impact that he's making. They didn't get the quarterbacking last year. They didn't have the team chemistry last year. It was a broken franchise. It's now up to Dave Dickenson and Vernon Adams to turn this thing around and get the Calgary Stampeders back to where we're used to seeing them. And that is not out of the Canadian Football League playoffs.
I'm with you on VA too, because I think he does bring an element of leadership to that locker room that has been missing. We've seen Vernon Adams evolve on the field. He's especially evolved when it comes to leadership and being that guy who leads by example. So while I don't have the same confidence as you, Huss, I just think there's too many moving pieces. I do think that Vernon Adams is the right guy to be in that position to help move the needle when it comes to chemistry in the locker room.
Yeah, listen, make no mistake about it. I'm not hammering the Stamps to win the West or win the Grey Cup or anything like that, but I do think that there is absolutely a path for this team to be considerably better than I think we remember them being the last couple of years. And to me, it starts with a reinvigorated Dave Dickenson with the new staff. But most of all, those thoughts revolve around a huge season for Vernon Adams. Well, speaking of quarterbacks, let's move north in Alberta and get to the Edmonton Elks. I mean, I don't even know what to say about the last number of years for Edmonton other than it threatened the stability and the existence of the franchise. They've got a new owner. They've got a new head coach. but they're running it back with Trey Ford, albeit with Cody Fajardo as the backup. Can question be the question for the Elks is, can Trey Ford establish him as a number one in the Canadian Football League and help turn this organization's fortunes around that have been so dismal coming out of the Chris Jones era?
I unfortunately don't have a crystal ball to tell you exactly how this is going to go down, and I have absolutely no clue. I am so looking forward to it. I want to, I've been a fan of Trey Ford. I've been critical of Trey Ford in the past. I've understood decisions not to make him the starting quarterback. I have railed against decisions to keep him as the number two. My point is, it's been such a roller coaster with Trey Ford in his CFL career, in his Canadian status, in his athletic ability, that he's finally getting this opportunity. You mentioned the new pieces at Edmonton has new GM and Ed Hervey too, and Ed Hervey doesn't get that job, I don't think, unless he's committed to Trey Ford after years of having this guy have to work his way into the starting lineup. I think it's a massive gamble here. I think it's, I'm not saying it's a gamble not worth taking. We've seen what Trey Ford can do. We've seen, as I mentioned, that athletic ability to escape pressure, to extend plays. That being said, your quarterback is the most important position on the field. And I'll revisit a conversation we had last year on CFL 110 that was pretty much the issue around Trey Ford and coaches handing him that trust of, being the most important player on the field, having the most say when it comes to win and losing games, is that he didn't command a huddle. He was learning the job of being a professional quarterback at the CFL level, and it took away from the confidence and his presentation, if you will, in the huddle. And that is incredibly important. And what I mean about commanding a huddle is him getting into a huddle and coaching up all the different players, telling this guy to go here, this guy to go here, and then continuing to do that as you walk to center and you are reading the defense. Because Trey Ford is so green to being a pro quarterback in the CFL, he would get into a huddle, he'd call the play, and then he would break from it, and he would have to be thinking about all his reads. My hope is that he drastically improved that over the offseason and is heading in with that kind of confidence to lead the team, because you need that. You can't just use raw athletic ability to be a successful quarterback in this league. You need to have it upstairs, and it's more than just going through your reads. It's being the most confident player on the football field. And while I've seen flashes of greatness from Trey Ford, you cannot tell me he's the most confident quarterback on the football field, let alone the CFL. And you know what? Edmonton did a lot of crazy things, went out and got a bunch of shiny new pieces around him. If Trey Ford cannot handle himself in the huddle and show that confidence, none of that will matter. Now, they have obviously Cody Fajardo waiting in the wings as a potential backup, but that's not going to be the plan this year. If Cody Fajardo is under center for Edmonton, we either saw an incredibly horrible first half of the season from Trey Ford, or he got injured. Because that is the plan. That's the guy. And I want to see it so badly. I want to see him succeed so badly, but I just don't have the confidence in him.
Listen, I won't really disagree with you. I can see two very divergent paths for this season going. And I, to be honest, I'm not even waiting till half of the season. To me, like, there is no team, especially with the new coach and Kylan coming over from Calgary and Jordan Maximic now handling the offense. This team has been so bad. They haven't won at home. I mean, there is an expectation that they are going to turn it around and be at least competitive early on. Like, if they start 0-4 and 0-5 and Trey Ford is fine, like, they've got a veteran quarterback in Cody Fajardo that they can throw in there. And I would not rule out Cody Fajardo getting a start by week 5 or week 6 if things start poorly. However, I do believe that Trey Ford has the tools to really excel. And Similarly to we were talking about Nathan Rourke, who's been in BC gelling with Buck Pierce and the coaching staff in BC. I think that this relationship with what Maximic brings in, getting more of Trey Ford as not the athlete, but as the CEO of the offense, is going to be absolutely crucial. And I've got a lot of faith that he'll be better and he will help them win football games. But if that doesn't happen, make no mistake about it, they've got a guy in Cody Fajardo that they can stick in. And listen, I think we'll see both players play at times, mainly because of injury. What'll be very interesting if there's a coach's decision that decides to go away from Trey Ford. We'll talk about this in the MOP odds. But Trey Ford at the bottom of the list of quarterbacks at 20-1. If this team has a turnaround this year, there's another guy that I think will get a ton of love from voters if he can really be the catalyst of a big turnaround. Moving over to Saskatchewan. Under Corey Mace, the team had a great bounce-back season. Now, they did go 2 months without winning a game in the middle of the season, but there they were in the West Final. The question for you, Jeff, and CFL fans going in, especially those in the rectangle province of Saskatchewan, can the Riders take that next step and win the West in 2025?
The question is very specific to winning the West for a good reason. Obviously, winning your division is the best opportunity to get to the Grey Cup, and if the Saskachewan Roughriders want to get to the Grey Cup, they need to have a home game against Winnipeg or BC or whoever it is. I just haven't trusted them to go on the road and get the job done, especially if they have to come to Winnipeg again. So to me, it's imperative that the Roughriders, who had a terrific season last year under rookie head coach Corey Mace, who, as you could tell in a couple different games throughout the season, was very much learning what it was like to be a head coach in this league. Clock management, time management. We all saw what happened on a couple of those games where it was like Corey Mace almost had to go to the post-game press conference with its tail between his legs and try to come up with some kind of explanation outside of the fact that he just didn't know what he was doing, right? That aside, he did so many other great things for the organization. He brought leadership to the locker room. He brought commitment, work ethic, all those pillars. He treated them differently than those in the past. He has a completely different mentality to Craig Dickinson, who just was just, I don't even know what that was in Saskatchewan under his leadership. But with Corey Mace, he's established this, and now it's building on what they achieved last season. And I do think when you look at roster makeup, when you look at the weapons they have on offense, on defense, and on special teams, I think Saskatchewan Roughriders are the most complete team in the West. And if they can build on what they did last season, they're going to be a very difficult team to play against. And again, winning that West, we've seen it with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, even in years where they haven't been as mighty as maybe other years, that when you can punch your ticket to that first place, that it is a much easier route. It's a one win at home to get to the Grey Cup. And that's why I think the biggest question in Riderville right now is, do they have enough? Is Winnipeg susceptible? Is BC susceptible this year? I think they are. And I think it's an opportunity for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, again, to build on what they had last year, bring Corey Mace included with his coaching, his ability, a healthy Trevor Harris, a healthy AJ Ouellette. They're going to have to make sure that they maintenance AJ Ouellette. We've seen him, with the six pack and trimmed down and whatnot. That's great. Maybe he's a bit quicker, but they're going to need to use him for much of the season and not abuse him early on like we saw last year. And if they can do that, Huss, I think Saskatchewan is as scary as any other team in the West right now.
Listen, personnel-wise, I think Saskatchewan is right there with their competition. And listen, I was very impressed with what Corey Mace did. The way he was able to keep an even keel through another season where the team had a nice start and then seemed to be going in reverse for a while. To me, the biggest question about Saskatchewan is how will they manage on the offensive line after some pretty significant injuries through training camp and the preseason? Because that line of scrimmage is so important when you're talking about protecting Trevor Harris, as well as giving a guy like AJ Ouellette the opportunity to be the battering ram and get 7, 8, 10 yards a carry after getting hit for the first time 2 or 3 yards down the field than having to deal with guys in your backfield before you're even getting out. I mean, we talk so much about quarterbacks because we live in sort of a fantasy world now where we're talking about points and we know the guys that end up on the highlights, but they have some big concerns on the line of scrimmage, and that could be a major factor in doing what they are hoping to do. Listen, I think that Jake Maier as a backup is adequate, but Trevor Harris is going to be the guy that will take them as far as they can go. And to be honest, I thought Trevor Harris was awesome last year and frankly should have maybe got a little more love for MOP at the end of the year considering what the Riders were able to achieve.
Need to be healthy.
But well, exactly. And I don't disagree with your take that if the Riders want to represent the West in the Grey Cup, win the West. Have the 13th man behind you. Have that game in Regina. We've seen how important it's been for Winnipeg over these number of years. And if the Bombers, or if the Riders want to take the Bombers' spot as the team to beat in the West, earning that home playoff game and a bye in the first round of the CFL playoffs will be huge. Moving on to the final team in the West, it is the 5-time defending West Division champion, Winnipeg Blue Bombers, coming off a third straight Grey Cup disappointment this year, hosting the Grey Cup at Princess Auto Stadium. Now, Jeff, there's been a lot of offseason turnover from this team. It was inevitable. Some would have thought that it maybe would have happened earlier. But the one guy, when it comes to Zach Collaros, and we can get into Zach's season last year and expectations for him with the new 1-year extension, so 2 more years with the Bombers, he's lost some pretty key targets. Drew Wolitowski was a bit of a safety blanket for Zach. He's no longer with the club. But Kenny Lawler, their highest paid receiver, has now moved on to Hamilton. Dalton Schoen, though, who was incredible 2 seasons ago and missed all but a couple games last year, is back. And when you look at the Bombers' history with Zach Collaros, like through this era, the season that Dalton Schoen put forth was one of the most impressive that we've seen in a long time in the Canadian Football League. He's coming off a very, very tough injury, hasn't played much through training camp. Will Dalton Schoen be back, and is that enough to keep the Bombers at a championship level in the West?
Well, he'll definitely be back, and the reason why Dalton Schoen is the question for a Winnipeg Blue Bombers team that, as you mentioned, Huss, we could make the question about what can we expect from Zach Collaros after one of his down years. What do we have for Brady Oliveira for an encore after winning Most Outstanding Player in 2024? But I argue that Dalton Schoen, as what you mentioned, with the loss of Drew Wolitowski, with the loss of Kenny Lawler, Dalton Schoen is kind of that, I don't want to say filler because there's a lot that's been lost, but I think he's the perfect complementary piece to all the things that we're talking about here. For Zach Collaros, you don't think that Zach Collaros missed Dalton Schoen last year? Yes. Kenny Lawler was his go-to guy, deep threat player, right? I mean, Kenny Lawler is the kind of guy that you'd like, makes a 50-50 ball in his favor, 9-10 times out of 10. But Dalton Schoen was the safety net, the guy who, when he came to Canada, it was like he was playing 3-down football his whole life because he was better at the waggle than most veteran players. That's like the number one thing receivers have an issue with, and Dalton Schoen just picked it up like it was like he knew it like it was the back of his hand. And he was such a touchdown scorer too, right? Kenny Lawler had lulls last year, right? There was just something about Dalton Schoen's consistency. When he is getting the ball, when the air attack is working at its height, Brady Oliveira benefits. And so what I'm looking at here is a Dalton Schoen who's going to be healthy, right? I mean, he's not full 100% right now, but he will be healthy sooner than later. And when he's healthy, he will be effective. He's a young player. He's a guy who doesn't have a ton of injuries. Yes, he's been hurt in the last couple seasons, missed a couple games a year before last year. But he is so consistent and is such a hardworking, and just what you get from him. And I just find that Dalton Schoen is going to be the resurgence of Zach Collaros. He is going to be the resurgence of this offense. And while, yes, they're missing a guy like Kenny Lawler, you can make the argument, Haas, that the Bombers chose Dalton Schoen over Kenny Lawler in this pick'em game. Mind you, obviously Kenny Lawler is getting paid a heck of a lot more money, and that factored into it. But the Bombers wanted Dalton Schoen back. They wanted what he brings, everything that he brings on and off the field, and that's the reason why Dalton Schoen is a Winnipeg Blue Bomber this year.
Listen, I'm sort of with you. I expect a big bounce-back season from Dalton Schoen, and to me, that is absolutely mandatory. When we talk about the guys that they've left, but I mean, listen, you got Jason Hogan taking over the offense. I mean, that's a significant change.
Massive.
You've got
Brady's
big-time change. I just brought up the offensive line in Saskatchewan. Well, guess what? Never mind injuries. Liam Dobson's gone. You've got questions at right tackle. So there's a lot of things that have to come into play. And listen, I'll give the Bombers the credit, the benefit of the doubt. They have proven that they find players and they find ways to win. All of those things need to happen for this team to take a step forward, because I think, with the 0-4 start, there was a step back last year. They proved their championship medal by battling back and winning the West and getting to the Grey Cup. But there certainly seems to be an era of unfinished business by a lot of players here, along with the pressure and the opportunity of playing in that Grey Cup game at home. So all eyes on Winnipeg, as it usually is around this time, but a very different start to the season with the amount of offseason change in Winnipeg. Moving over to the West, let's start in the Hammer.
East.
Steeltown. Bo Levi Mitchell had, speaking of great comeback seasons last year, a lot of people thought he was destined for the TSN booth, and there he was in contention for the MOP. The problem was their defense stunk last year, and they couldn't keep teams out of the end zone. I'm sure their offense will be productive this year. But, Jeff, the question for the Hamilton Tiger Cats is, can their defense get it done to make them a contender in the East?
It's the biggest question here. All the talk, and rightfully so, is on the offense, right? It's talking about Bo Levi Mitchell's season. It's talking about the addition of Kenny Lawler to what is probably maybe even easily the best receiving group in the CFL, right? You have a beefed up O-line. There's a lot, even all their social media. It's all the excitement around what is going to, by all facets, a dominating offensive group. It's the defense. It's the defense that went through a little bit of overhaul. You have a little bit of overhaul, particularly when it comes to the secondary. Deshaun Amos is one, a guy who they were able to pick up. He's a solid addition to the group. They shed some linebackers, picked up some new guys. It's just, there's a lot of moving pieces in that lineup. And while the excitement, it's clear, like even their rush game, like Taiwan Garbett, right? Like, he's a guy who Winnipeg liked last year, but didn't really see much of, right? Like, didn't really see much of, but didn't have a breakout season, and was all of a sudden this, a highly sought after defensive end. But here he is being kind of heralded as one of the best rushers on their team. And to me, that's where the issue is. The issue is not being able to get to the quarterback. And when you're not able to get to the quarterback, it doesn't matter who you have in the secondary. It doesn't matter how talented those guys are at covering. If you give the quarterback enough time, and we know we know that other quarterbacks are going to have time against this defensive line. What are they going, like, how is that going to mix in everything that Hamilton's doing this year? So I think it is, Ted Gavaya, former Winnipeg GM, he did come and do what we've seen in the past. We've seen GMs leave their respective teams and grab a bunch of guys and bring them over. They've done that. But I look at that defense, and I'm still wondering if we're not going to see another year added onto this curse.
You mentioned the guy that I was going to bring up, and that is former Bomber AGM Ted Gavaya, who's now filling the holes in Hamilton. Listen, Bo Levi had an unbelievable season last year. For the most part, there were some ugly moments, but I mean, there's no doubt that their offense was productive. Ted Gavaya has been a guy that over the years here in Winnipeg, there has been key players that have moved away from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, come into camp with a bunch of guys no one's ever heard of, and the next thing you know, they're losing Alford to the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, they're finding players to do it. If Ted Gavaya can do that, this team absolutely can contend. But I do think there's going to be a lot more on the defense, because I'm not sure, even with the addition of Kenny Lawler, can you expect as incredible an offensive season from Bo Levi Mitchell at his age right now going into 2025? Then we move up the QEW to Toronto, the defending Grey Cup champions. Chad Kelly, the favorite for MOP. The Argos, favorites to return and win the Grey Cup. What do the Argos have for an encore this year, Hammer?
It's going to be a really interesting question because they got stripped for parts in the offseason. It's just, I mentioned the Calgary way. If the Calgary way was dominance and it's almost it's now the Toronto way, because in Calgary, as I mentioned before, they would have players come, great scouting, great player personnel people, and their pitch essentially would be, come here, dominate, and maybe get your shot back in the NFL. What we're seeing with Toronto here is similar to that, but what's happening is there's no loyalty in Toronto. And it's not the players. I'm not blaming the players. It's a two-way street, right? I mean, this offseason, they had a bunch of guys that were going to get we're all given, options to renegotiate their contracts. And if they didn't, they were kind of gone, right? So there's just this attitude in Toronto that we don't really need you. And they've been able to reload year after year after year after year. And they're going to need to do that again this year. Chad Kelly is a big question mark for whether he's going to be healthy in week one. Now, careful. Grey Cup MVP Nick Arbuckle is right behind him and is ready to start in week one if needed. But it's just, again, they have some great players. They were able to keep Coxie at receiver. They were able, why is his name missing me? I just had him, the running back from Calgary. Why am I missing his name? Kadeem Carey, sorry. Kadeem Carey is back. So they have these pieces that they have, but they're going to be another outfit that's going to have to adjust on the fly. And while looking at any other team in this league, and I might say, how many times have I mentioned moving parts as a negative piece to a team? I think Toronto is the only team in the Canadian Football League where moving so many moving pieces isn't necessarily a recipe for disaster or even growing pains.
Hey, listen, this team has been there and done that, and they inevitably end up in the East Final, and at least recently, more often than not, playing for the Grey Cup. They've got their quarterback. Obviously, the question about Chad Kelly's there, but I think Nick Arbuckle is going to come into this season with, just a new lease on his professional life after the incredible story that he wrote in the Grey Cup. And the bottom line is they've got an elite head coach in Ryan Dinwiddie and an organization that finds a way to be competitive, more often than not the team to beat in the East year after year after year. They've got a championship pedigree. Listen, we'll see whether they can be the top team and host that East Final, but I think we'd be nuts to not think that the Argos will be in that game and a very likely opponent for whoever wins the West at Princess Auto Stadium in November in the Grey Cup. To Ottawa, and this is pretty clear. Drew Brown, what can he do in year two to move this thing forward? They've taken some steps under Bobby Dice. It's time to take that next step to follow up a great first half of last season with a start that goes longer and obviously with more playoff success. What do you expect from Drew Brown in year two?
I expect from Drew Brown what I expect from this team in general to take another positive step. There's a lot of pressure on the RedBlacks last year. They had continually missed the playoffs year in and year out after winning the Grey Cup. And they got Drew Brown. They finally got their quarterback, their guy, right? But even Drew Brown went into a very, very crowded locker room, right? He was in there with Dustin Crum, who had started for the RedBlacks several games the year before. He was in there with Jeremiah Masoli, who has started and won a ton of games in this league and was supposed to be that team's quarterback for the resurgence. So while Drew Brown signed the contract heading into last season and was deemed as the new face, the new QB1, he was facing a heck of a lot of pressure. I'll add on the fact the guy lost his father the year before. I'm not saying that it lingered into the season or whatever, but, he had been thrown a major curveball the year before. And so there was just a lot to lose for him as a guy who was coming in to a new team, a new organization, and was expected to lead an offense for the first time, despite showing a lot of great signs in Winnipeg. So he lived up to that pressure. He lived up to that, dealt with some injuries throughout the year, but really became not only a bona fide number one quarterback in this league, but also a leader in the locker room. Now, I don't think that was ever debatable. Drew Brown was a leader, but again, going into a quarterback room with leaders and experienced players and in an organization you've never spent any time with before, that can be a daunting task. I think this year is Drew Brown's year to step forward and establish himself as one of the, not just a bona fide number one quarterback, but one of the best quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League. I like what Ottawa has done to their O-line. It's not perfect, but it's better. I like the weapons that they've surrounded him with. I like that they picked up a guy in William Stanback to add to the run game, and I really do think that this is an opportunity for Drew Brown to make the most of a great opportunity that he's deserved. And I think, I go as far as say the sky's the limit for Drew Brown. I'm not saying he's going to throw the lights out next year and be this year and be number one in all categories, but I'm also not ruling it out. We know how much this team has wants to throw the ball. I think Drew Brown was put in a very interesting spot in the playoffs last year when he threw 61 attempts. They aren't going to have to rely on the throwing game as much this year. I see Drew Brown nestling in nicely into his second year and taking some massive strides this year.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I think, it's funny. I bumped into Bobby Dice in the offseason, and, listen, I'm a fan of Bob. I mean, it's just as an individual, he's one of the best guys that you'll meet. And one of the true good guys in the Canadian Football League. So I've always had kind of a soft spot for Ottawa. And listen, Drew Brown, to your point, I think really showed well when he was in there last year. They weren't a complete team, though. I mean, at times their defense evaporated in the second half of the season when they needed it. But to your point, I think with Stanback in and some stability at that running back position, improved offensive line, improved weapons, I think the offense is going to be there. The question about Ottawa is, can they put it all together in all three phases of the game with defense and special teams, which is a Bobby Dice specialty, to move from a team that can they prove that they belong and potentially be a playoff team to being a true contender in the East. And finally, the Montreal Alouettes. A very interesting offseason trade of MBT going to Montreal for Cody Fajardo. This is a guy that led them to the championship. I guess we're going to find out very quickly, similar to what Drew Brown was under the pressure of last year going to Ottawa, did they make the right decision in giving the keys to the car to Davis Alexander in Montreal?
Oh, I think it was absolutely the right decision. Whether or not it pans out is another question, right? A couple different things at play here, Huss. Number one, I do think that Cody Fajardo, while he was, I'd go as far as to say he was a warrior with the Alouettes. He brought leadership, guys
Absolutely.
Rallied around him, obviously, and he certainly became a much more likable player than what we saw in his final years.
And he brought him a championship.
And he brought them a championship, absolutely. But Davis Alexander's 26 years old, Huss. He is young. He has an arm. He has, he has mobility. He has things that are long lost Cody Fajardo. He's a guy who has the locker room. The locker room really likes Davis Alexander. They liked him a lot. And he showed that he could do it. He was perfect last year in 4 or 5 games. He won every game. So he has the pedigree, if you will. It wasn't just one game. It wasn't just 2 games. This guy came in and won games and helped Montreal secure, their place in the standings. So, but the issue is here, Huss, is a couple things. One, there's now tape on Davis Alexander. People can now go look back, see, pick out some patterns of his play and really scout for him. That wasn't really the case last season. The other thing is, and I've talked to a player on their team, a high-end player on their team, which I won't name. It was a private conversation at Grey Cup. But it was a very interesting one talking about, going with Davis Alexander versus Cody Fajardo. And the argument wasn't so much that they should have gone with Cody Fajardo. They should go at that point with Cody Fajardo. It was that you got to be careful what you wish for with Davis Alexander, because Cody Fajardo has forgot more about this league than Davis Alexander knows about it. And so what I'm saying in that is that while Davis Alexander's feeling really good about himself, there's always that adjustment in your second year. When teams have more tape on you, the pressure ramps up here. Do I think it's the right decision? Absolutely the right decision. But whether or not it's going to continue to be a seamless transition is going to be an interesting development for Montreal this year.
Yeah, listen, I was incredibly impressed with Davis Alexander, like so many were, when he sort of came out of seemingly nowhere as the third stringer to basically take over the job and prove that he is a guy that someone was going to have starting this season, whether it was Montreal or elsewhere. We saw the decision that was made. I don't want to say that I'm higher on him than Drew Brown, because I do think that, to your point, we're going to need to see how things look in that second season. But to be honest, I would make the argument that knowing that he is the assumed starter going into camp and in the preseason, he's got a far better chance for success this year than when he got thrown in from injury as basically a third stringer, not getting many reps at all. So I think the ceiling is very high for Davis Alexander. The one thing I'll say for Montreal as well is that bringing in MBT, while maybe not the best, he's a real competitor and maybe a little rougher around the edges, or at least that's been reported in some other spots.
He's okay.
The guy can definitely sling it. And if they need to go to him due to injury, they've got a great backup plan. And if Davis Alexander struggles, I think they've got a guy that can go in. So I don't see a big drop-off for the Montreal Alouettes. I think they will absolutely be a contender. I think I'm going to assume that Toronto and Montreal will be right there. And the big questions are, can Hamilton and Ottawa take that next step to really challenge those teams? In an East that for the first time actually dominated the West last year in head-to-head matchups, which was not something that we'd seen in forever in the Canadian Football League.
I think McLeod Bethel-Thompson isn't looking at that receiver group and thinking, man, could I have a comeback in this league? Because, look at Tyson Philpott, Austin Mack, Charleston Rambo, Cole Speaker. Those guys are, all of them are potential 1,000-yard receivers. And that is going to help Davis Alexander in a massive way.
Speaking of that, now again, on next week's show, we'll hit the top stories in the league heading into week one, but we'll have it expanded. Every week this year on CFL 110, we'll be picking the games against the spread for Coolbet. We'll have a fun season-long competition for it. But before week one gets going, obviously, there are so many futures offerings over at Coolbet. So next week, we'll hit a couple of our favorite MOP odds bets, Grey Cup winner as well, and then, of course, get into some season totals for teams as well as player props for the season. Now, just to take a quick look at the MOP odds as it stands today, Chad Kelly is the favorite at plus 425. Nathan Rourke was 8-1. He is now 7-1 at plus 700. So there's been some confidence that Nathan Rourke can get back to where he was in 2022. 10-1 is Zach Caleros, Davis Alexander, and Drew Brown. 11-1, Brady Oliveira, Trevor Harris, Bo Levi Mitchell. Sorry, Bo is 16-1. And then two quarterbacks, and I will make the argument right now that the value of the board is on Trey Ford and Vernon Adams at 20-1.
They're both at 20-1?
They're both at 20-1. And
one feels way more obvious than the other.
Listen, if either of those quarterbacks take their respective teams to the playoffs, to have a great statistical season, because of where they're starting for, they're going to get a lot of extra love. So go
Here's
to Coolbet.
Here's the thing, Huss, on that too. Sorry to interrupt. But if you look at the history of the last few years in the CFL, there are some usual suspects that get injured. right? And injuries play a massive role in MOP voting because not only like everyone leans towards quarterbacks. It's very I mean, I know we're coming off a year where Brady Oliveira won it, but there's a reason Brady Oliveira won it because of injuries and down seasons of other quarterbacks. There's a reason why Banks won it. Back in the year where Cody Fajardo was up for MOP, because that was the year that quarterbacks got injured. So if you're making picks, consider injuries at play here, and the fact that quarterbacks, if you can stay healthy, and Trey Ford and Vernon Adams are guys that can usually stay healthy, would be a good bet.
Outside, and again, go to Coolbet, click on CFL and then Futures for the full list. Some of the non-QBs in the mix, we've got Justin McInnis at 30-1, Tyson Philpott 35, Milligan, who had that monster season last year for the Riders, at 35-1, Kadeem Carey and Coxie, Austin Mack at 40, and then Dalton Schoen, who we just talked about, and AJ Ouellette at 50-1 as well. Quickly, the Grey Cup odds as of today: Argos, your favorite, at plus 325. The Bombers and Alouettes at 5-1. Riders 6-1. Ottawa plus 750. BC plus 850. Hamilton plus 1250. Edmonton 14-1. And Calgary 25-1 to win the Cup, which is the longest preseason odds we've seen in 2 years since the Montreal Alouettes won the Grey Cup as a 19-1 preseason underdog. Quickly, win totals you can chew on before we make our picks next week. BC's over-under is 9.5 wins. Hamilton, 8.5. Saskatchewan, 10. Edmonton, 8.5. Ottawa, 10. Winnipeg, 10. And am I missing any other teams here? Oh, Calgary Stampeders, 6.5. Montreal, 10.5. And the Toronto Argonauts, 11 games. So next week, we'll have our favorite plays and value bets for the MOP, for the Grey Cup. We'll grab a win total or two. And there are player props for so many players right now: running backs, receivers, quarterbacks, for their yardage totals and more. You can check those all at our partner at Coolbet Canada. Go to coolbet.com, click on CFL for all of it. And if you haven't played at Coolbet before, use the promo code WST for a 100% bonus up to $200 on your first deposit. Hammer, fun taking a trip around the Canadian Football League. We are 7 days away from our Week 1 edition of CFL 110 and getting it going again for another great season of 3-down football.
Always a good time, man, and I'm smiling because I'm looking forward to next week already and some of our picks and our future picks as well. So fun first show. Really looking forward to this season. Should be a ton of fun, and certainly we'll have it all on here at CFL 110.
You got it, folks. If you haven't already, make sure to like this episode. Leave a comment with your takes on what we've talked about and maybe your hot 2025 season predictions. And make sure to subscribe to the channel, CFL 110, weekly, Tuesdays for the most part, depending on the schedule, right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. And, of course, you can join us for more CFL chat every day, Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. Central in Winnipeg on the Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily Show. For producer Michael Remus, Jeff Hamilton, I'm Andrew Paterson. We'll see you next week for Week 1 lines and all the big stories heading into Week 1 in the Canadian Football League. Thanks for being with us on CFL 110.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.